Hey guys, welcome back. At this point, we're battle-hardened developers and we've dipped our toes in the pool of a little server administration, a little database administration, but I'm sure we've done enough to set up our server on our local machine as well as our database, or we have deployed to the cloud and we have our Azure Web App Service running alongside our SQL service running. Now, I may have alluded to on a number of occasions, especially when we were talking about the IIS deployment, that there is actually a much more seamless way to do it than, publishing and then taking it and copying it over to the server and so on. And the reality is that we just might not have that kind of access to all of these machines. If you are a senior developer, you probably really don't want your developers to have to go through that each time, but you want a more seamless way to make sure that it's quality code that is being published each time. So we had been using GitHub as our source control provider, and GitHub does provide what they call actions that, put in some build actions and automation, some amount of it into .NET Core apps. But in my opinion and experience, GitHub is more geared towards Node and Python things, not necessarily .NET things. But Microsoft has Azure DevOps, which gives us access to a number of tools that are amazing for automating building and publishing .NET applications. So you can get here by going to azure.microsoft.com and go to products, services, and Azure DevOps. And you can see you can start free with GitHub. So you can sign in with your GitHub account. But if at this point you already signed up with Microsoft Azure, then you can go ahead and use that live account to register on this site. Or, well, you technically would already have an account. And once again, you can start free as an individual. It is great. It's like GitHub, but with a little more to it because they have the TFS engine if you've ever used Team Foundation server. If not, that's fine. It's just a really powerful tool that they had for years and they've ported it to the web and they give you all of those agile planning tools, CI, CD. So you always hear CI and CD, that's continuous integration or continuous development, deployment. Right? All of those tools are built in. You can have as many repos free as you want, but they will be private. GitHub gives you as many free public ones. I think now the private ones are free also. You can deploy test plans. If you do unit testing, artifacts, can be deployed and they can automate that whole, what we call release pipeline. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be exploring doing a release pipeline on top of the application or the website that we already built. All right. Now I'm switched over to the web server, and just as a quick reminder, we have our website deployed to our application deployed to our IIS website called Leave Management. And we get to it through the address leavemanagement.intranet.com. And just to refresh ourselves on the IIS configuration, we have the application pool dedicated to the web application. And we also have the website Leave Management. So now what we need to do is set up a release pipeline such that, and note, this is a server. This could be a server on your local machine, or once again, it could be in the cloud, but it is a dedicated server and it is hosting our application. Now what we're going to do is set up a release pipeline from Azure DevOps, which is in the cloud, such that when we build something, maybe do a bug fix and we check it in, it does an automatic build, make sure that we didn't break anything, and then it will automatically do the deployment. So I'm going to do it manually, and then we're going to look at how we can automate it, or done like a nightly build schedule or a nightly release schedule, so that, you do the bug fix today, you vet it, and then by tomorrow morning, it's in the system without you having to do much more. So once again, to get started, you can sign in with your Azure account or your live account, or you can just continue with your GitHub account. So since we've been using GitHub, I'm going to go ahead with the GitHub account. Now I'm going to be using my Azure account, but mine is already set up and it's been in use. So I'm going to just do this from the basics so that we're in this particular struggle together. So I'm just using my GitHub account. I go ahead and sign in. And then it's going to let me know that I already have an account. I'll just continue. And then it's going to just confirm that I want to link my credentials. And then it's letting me know that my credentials have been added to the GitHub credentials have been added to my Microsoft account. Next time I sign in, I can choose to use the existing Microsoft account password or just sign in like I'm signing in to GitHub. So I just say got it and move along. All right, and I just had to provide a few more details and click next, and there I am. I'm inside my Azure DevOps. So I had a student already who once added me to his organization for a project that he did, a really good project also. But that is why I'm seeing that there. So you might not see it. What you'd want to do is go and click new organization. And then the organization is like creating a team, right? So you just want to do that. You can opt in or out of getting promotional articles from them. You choose your username. So I'm just going to go with my base username, and I'm going to put my projects to be hosted in, well, Central US is the only, well, that's the best one for me. So I'll leave it as Central US, but they're letting me know that it's already taken. So probably I just add something to it and continue. All right, and then we're here in our organization. So the organization's name is Trevor Williams 1. Now from here, I'm going to have to create a project name. So the project name is Leave Management, and I'm going to name it the same thing it's called on GitHub, Leave-Management. I can choose whether I want it to be public or private. So I'm going to leave this one as private, and then I'll go ahead and create project. And then we have a fresh project. So you can just take a while and look. You see you have a few more things than GitHub shows you, at least at face value. If you hover over boards, you see work items. You can do sprints, backlogs, everything here. Repos show you your files, your commits. At the end of the day, the words are pretty much the same because this is also using a Git engine. So GitHub is based on Git. Azure DevOps, their primary engine is also Git. So you're going to see a lot of words and phrases in common between the two. Now, what I want to do is link this particular project to my GitHub project, right? So this is an empty project. I don't want to have to go and start filling it again. You see it's empty here, right? So I don't want to have two separate projects. I want this project to be linked to the GitHub project. And the great thing about Microsoft owning both is that they made that very possible. So I can go to project settings and then select GitHub connections from the menu. So you see boards, you see GitHub connections, and then they're saying connect your GitHub account. So I'm going to go ahead and connect my account. And because I'm already signed in as GitHub, it's going to let me know that I just need to authorize that. And I'm just going to untick these. So, okay, I guess I'll leave that for another time then. So I'll just go ahead and authorize Azure boards, and then it will do its magic and then fetch the entire list of all my repositories. So some of these are mine, some of them I've been invited to, but the point is that I have access to all my repositories. So I'm going to go with Leave Management and then click Save. And then I'm going to have to go ahead and approve and install and authorize again. So all of these checks are just to make sure you know exactly the risks and what you're doing. So you can take time to read if you wish, but I'm just pressing ahead. All right, so now that we've set up this connection, what this allows us to do is kind of manage our tasks and issues from DevOps, Azure DevOps, relative to our GitHub repository. So it's a powerful connection. And what our objective is, once again, is to set up a build pipeline and release pipeline so that when we check into GitHub, it will, Azure DevOps will automatically take it, build it, and vet it before it lets it move forward. So from here, what I'm going to do is go over to pipeline. So that little rocket, I'm just going to click it, and then it's prompting us to create our first pipeline. So I'm just going to create pipeline, and then this allows me to select what kind of pipeline would I like. So if the code was resident, then I would do an Azure repos Git. But if you look inside of files, once again, there's nothing there, right? But the files are over in GitHub. So once again, create pipeline, and I'm going to be selecting GitHub. So I choose GitHub, and then it's going to prompt me to select the repository. So I'm just going to select my leave management repository, and it's just going to validate that I have the permissions and then allow me to approve once again. All right, and now it's warning me that I'm using a public repository, but this is not a public project. So GitHub is public, but this is private. So I guess they're prompting me to say, hey, just make sure both of them have the same level of visibility. Of course, in an organizational setting, your code your code wouldn't and shouldn't be public. All right, but I'm just going to switch this one from private to public, just so that I can stop getting that prompt. So I just clicked project settings, which brought up the project details, and I switched it over from private to public, and I'll save. And so I can continue. So I can just tick that off. I just did the change, so I can tick off the warning. And so I'm going to go ahead and select ASP.NET Core. And that's going to create what we call a YML or YAML file. So if you look at the file, you notice that you have like a base, and then you have like a dash, and it's basically a nice, clean configuration file. It's very popular. They use them in Docker. It's hard for me to kind of describe the layout, but it's a really clean layout. And if you just pay attention, you can see that it's doing certain things at certain steps. So I want to add one more step to this, where at the end of all of these tasks, and you can add more tasks, you can add more steps if you want, because if you have like unit testing to do before you can approve the build, then you would want to add in a step to make sure that happens and so on. But I want to add a task where I tell it to publish an artifact. So I just said -task: publish build artifacts at sign 1. All right, so this is basically saying that after you've done a successful build, I want you to publish this build, or put together the package with that new build and all the published files. So that would save me the trouble of going back to Visual Studio and then right-clicking and clicking publish and putting it somewhere and this and that and this and that, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and save and run this. So I just click save and run, and then it's just going to give me a commit message, and I can just say save and run once again. Going to need a few to create the pipeline. And then once that is in progress, you see that you can go ahead and click the job, and then you see this cool command prompt. So you can sit down and watch it a while, and you see all the code coming up. But in the meanwhile, actually, I'm going to change this theme because I don't like the white. So I'm going to change this over to the dark theme. All right, that's simple. So you just go to the little emblem here with the gear, and you select theme, and then you can switch to dark theme. All right. So we can give that a few, you see, so it gives you all of the steps that it's going through. It's going to run the NuGet command, get all of the binaries or the packages that were included in your project along the way, do a build, run the unit tests, and then publish the artifacts. So we'll just give it a few to finish up. And we'll get a nice indicator once we have a successful build. So if something broke in the code, then this step would not have happened. All right. So, or at least it wouldn't have completed. So the next thing, so this is the build. Now, what I want to do is set up a release pipeline. So I'm going to go over to releases, and then I'm going to say I want a new pipeline. And then from here, they will give me a few templates. So they'll say, what kind of template do you want? Do you want the app service deployment? So that means you check in your code, they do the build, and then they just deploy it to Azure automatically. Or do you want the IIS website and SQL database deployment? So in this situation, that's the one we're interested in, because remember, we want to automate the publishing from our repository to our actual VM with our database and IIS. So I'm going to click this one and then click apply. And then we have some configurations that we have to do. So they're just showing you that, you know, this is the artifact. So remember that we just put in a step to publish artifacts, right? And then this is, or these are the stages. All right. So I'm going to click add an artifact firstly. And then I can choose to add an artifact based on a build, or I can choose to add one based on the repository, or choose to add one based on GitHub. So just choosing the repository or GitHub means that anything that's checked in, just call it an artifact. But I don't really want to do that. I want the build to happen with any special configurations maybe that we put in, and then that is going to be the artifact. Only when it's successful should it be released. All right, so I'm going to add, so that using this drop down, you should see that name of the build pipeline based on the one that we just created. We just created the pipeline with the build, and that's that name there. And then we can go ahead and click add. So you can see here the artifacts published by each version will be available for deployment in release pipelines. The last successful build was published the following artifacts. All right, so I can just go ahead and add. So at least we have an artifact. You can also schedule. So you see, you can schedule a release trigger to say that, and I'm just going to go ahead and enable it, that every time at these times we want to release a new build or release a new artifact for potential release, right? So I'm not going to enable it now. We're doing it manually now, but I'm just showing you how you can go about automating it. Next, the stage would be, you can have UAT, you can have production, QA, etc. So that's what stage really means. So you can add many stages to say that, okay, when the artifact is released and then it's passed through, you can move from this environment to this environment, etc. Right now, I'm just doing one. So we're just moving from the build to the deployment on the server. And then we have to pay some attention to this. So I'm just going to call this one VM deployment. All right, so that's the stage name. And then I'm just going to walk you through each of these fields and explain why we may or may not need them. Now, this pipeline allows you to actually build the IIS website from scratch. So we went through all of those steps. We went in, we built the website, we built our application pool, we set up our database and everything. These steps rather allow us to automate all of that. Now, most of it is done, so I'm going to actually not need most of these steps, right? So the configuration type, IIS website, we can leave that. Then you're going to see create or update. So I already have it created. So I'm just going to click start because I don't want to make any changes. Create or update means that if it doesn't exist, create it, obviously, or I'm going to put new settings in there, so change them. But I just want it to start. I don't want to change anything that's there. The website name was Leave Management. All right. That was the name that we gave to our website in IIS. And then we can specify where we want our database or DAC pack. So they have this thing called DAC pack, right? Which is like a deployment file. Specify the way in which you want to deploy the DB. We can use DAC pack or SQL script. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as DAC pack and put in the database name, which is leave_management. All right, so just pay attention to those. If your naming was as close as mine, one without an underscore, one with, just be careful that you're putting the right names at the right places. So for each section, we are going to see if we need to add, put in more details. So if I just click the IIS deployment, you see more details, more attention is required. It's going to talk about a deployment group. So I don't have any deployment groups. I guess I'm going to have to create one. So I can go to the gear, and then that is going to bring up that deployment group section. And that section shows us that we don't have any groups. So the deployment group is basically, and here it is, it defines a logical group of target machines for deployment. All right, so you can deploy it to multiple machines with one release. It's just a matter of setting up the deployment group. So we only have one machine. So I'm just going to add a deployment group. I'm going to call this one prod. And of course, loosely so, I'm not here to teach you about your release pipeline and the specifics therein. I'm just showing you how to set up a basic pipeline, and then your business rules will govern which environment gets it first, right? So then the next thing now is that they're going to say, well, in order to facilitate communication between this cloud application and the machine that the deployment will be happening on, which would be our server, we need to run this script. So it's a PowerShell script. In case you've never heard of PowerShell, this is what it is, or you maybe heard of it and never saw it before. This is what it looks like. You don't really have to understand this. I'm not going to really try and explain it to you, but I'm just going to tick use a personal access token in the script for authentication. And then I'm going to copy this script. And then it's saying run from an administrator PowerShell command prompt. So once again, just copy the script. Then we hop over to our server. And then on the server, I'm going to have to bring up my PowerShell window. So every server or Windows 7 upwards machine should have PowerShell on it. The key is that you just right click and you say run as administrator. Once you're in, you're going to paste the script and press enter. And then it's going to deploy an Azure agent. So it's showing you the directory, C and then C AZ agent. And you give it some time. After a while, you're going to get this prompt. And I think I pressed enter a few times, too many, but then it's just, yeah, so it's going to give you these few lines, and then it's registering an agent connecting to the server, and then saying enter deployment group tags for agent. I'm just going to say Y for yes. Oh, well, you can enter them, so I really don't need to, but I'm just going to say web and DB. That's fine, comma separate them. And I'm looking in the directory where the agent is being created or all the supporting files are being deployed. Then it says enter user account for the service, press enter for NT authority systems. So remember that is a very powerful user. I'm just going to use that user so that anything that needs to happen can happen, and permissions are granted, and now our agent is set up. So when I go back to Azure, I can go over to the targets tab, and I will now see that machine listed. And those are the tags that they were asking me about. So they were really optional, but hey, all right. So once I see the machine, I can feel confident that that step is done. So I'm going to go back to my release pipeline, and then I can just refresh this deployment group. And you see, I'm working with multiple tabs because I don't like stopping and going back and so on. So when I drop down, I see prod. That's good. So now I have my deployment group, and that error goes away. I'm going to look inside of this one, and this one is peculiar because there's really nothing to change here. All I did was tick and untick enable IIS. So enable IIS means check this if you want to install it on the machine. So if it was the very first deployment, it wasn't on the machine, I guess you would check it. We don't need it because IIS is already there. Everything is already set up. And then we go down to the SQL deployment, and then we once again select prod because that's our target machine. So here's a situation now where if the database was on a different machine, then we'd have to set up another target machine or deployment group. So this would probably be like prod web versus prod DB, right? But then they're both on the same machine. So I'm just using the same deployment group, and everything will look the same way. If I drill down into the DB deploy, we will have to provide some details on the server. So remember that our server, or my server, is not localhost, but it's SQL Express SQL Express. Right? So the same kind of server name that you put inside of the connection string, you have to make sure you're targeting that same database. The authentication we can leave as Windows authentication based on how we deployed it before, and so on. So what I'm showing is a guideline. I don't really know your situation, but at least I'm giving you an idea of what is possible. So once we've done that and we've cleared out all of the red lines, at least in this section, then we can click save. And I'll just click OK. Don't have to change that. All right, so what I'm going to do is trigger a manual release right now, right? So I can just do that, and I can just click create release. So I'm just going to take a mental note of all the files that are currently in the leave management folder and the timestamps to see if maybe any of them might change after the release. But I'm going to go ahead and go back. So let me just come out of the virtual machine, create release. And then we can see that to the side, they're just confirming it's a VM deployment, and we can choose the artifact, and we can even put in a release description, just to say this release fixed this bug, etc. We go ahead and click create, and then you see that the job has begun. So I can click release, and then it's going to bring me to a screen that's going to show me a little progress. And they're so kind. They are trying to show you that they made some improvements, but I don't need to see that. And then they're going to show me that I manually triggered this build. This is the artifact. And then I can click deploy. And then once I do that, I click deploy. So I'm saying that I want you to deploy to the VM. So I can click on that deployment and then click on the play button or on that semicircle, and then it will bring me to a screen that is showing me the progress of the deployment. And then that is done, right? So it took 38 seconds to put in that release. Now let me go back to my virtual machine and look back in the folder with the files, and well, everything seems to be there and is quite fine. Now I'm going to make a tangible change. So I'm going to maybe make a change to the login screen to say login here, something like that. And then we'll see how we check it in, the build, the release, and then look for the update. All right, so very minor change, and I'm just doing this for, showing sake. You probably don't have to do all of that, but I'm just going to go ahead and commit this change, test for release. That's all I'm doing as a note, and then I'm going to commit all and sync. And so when I go over to Azure DevOps, I'm seeing that it is in the process of doing a build. All right. So I just checked something in and it's already doing a build because it detected that something new happened in GitHub. So it is now building to make sure that whatever change was made was okay. I can view the two changes just to make sure that it is building. All right. So there we go, test for release. So it got the change, and it's just doing its job automatically, right? So we can always click on job to see the progress, and we give that some time. And once that build is completed, we see that we have a new artifact. So when I go over to releases, I can trigger a manual release if I want. And I'm seeing here that something failed. I'm wondering if this was my previous release that failed. Okay. So by going in, I see that the SQL deployment part of it failed. So we would probably have to do a bit more work than just deploying the SQL like this, or maybe we need to use not a DACPack, but an SQL script. Either way, let's focus on the web part for now, and then we can figure out the SQL part. So I'm going to go back to releases. All right, so this is the thing with the setting of the pipeline. It can be very technical at first, but then once you get it automated, it's not something you have to do every day. All right, so I'm going to create a new release. Now, once again, if I edit the pipeline, if I edit the release pipeline and I go and schedule it, then I can schedule a release trigger into the deployment, right? So that means I can do a nightly release or an hourly release, whatever it is. But right now I'm doing it manually because I'm not in a production setting. I don't need to set it on a schedule. All right. So I'm creating the release, and then I go ahead and hit create, and then it's going to start the release. So I guess it's going to fail once again on the database leg, but let us at least validate that the web leg was done successfully. So by going in, I see that it did the IIS part, or at least the first part of the IIS changes. It's doing the actual deployment now. All right, and I'm getting an error here saying that it failed to deploy because it cannot modify the file automapper DLL. It's locked in by some process. So something interrupted this release on the server, and I'm probably just going to have to go in and make sure that all the resources are free for the release to happen. All right. All right, so I went on the server and I just restarted the web app or the website. So I just clicked it and did a restart. I also just did a recycle on the app pool, and then I'm going to try again. All right, so sometimes releases fail because of these things. So yes, you automate it, but then you can always, this failure is almost a guarantee at some point. So I'm going to just go ahead and create another release. So I have 2 failed releases so far. I'm just going to go ahead, create another one, and then you see it's in progress. We click it just to watch it go. And then let's see if the resources have been freed up. All right, and there we go. We have a successful release. And well, this time it just succeeded. There's no error whatsoever. So if I go back to releases, then, it's still going through another phase. So there it failed on the SQL deployment. So the IS deployment was good and the SQL deployment failed. We already know that that one might have failed, but let's go back to our server and see if we can spot any major differences. All right, and there we go. So all I did was add here, right? Remember, I did say we would change login to login here. So I did that change, checked it into GitHub. Azure DevOps automatically did a build, validating what needed to be validated. Once again, those steps are very basic out of the box, but you can add more validations to each build, especially if you're a senior developer and you want more quality control over what goes into the environment. But at the basic level, it did a build and it held the artifact, and then we set up that release. So once again, if you wanted to automate that, because that was a very manual process having to go to release, then create release, and then start it, we can edit the pipeline. So that's going to releases, and then you say edit, and then we can do a schedule where we say every day at maybe 3 a.m. you do so you see, only schedule releases if the source or pipeline has changed. So that means once somebody checks in code and it has passed through the build and it is successful and it's now an artifact, once it's different from what obtains, then automatically do a release. My objective today was to show you how you can start at least to automate between checking in code and releasing it into your environment.